From Lewis in the Black Horse Pub. Well, we've had quite a lively morning this morning from 8 o'clock onwards with the two Bs. A little look at what the papers are saying, and Rishi Sunak is getting up to with the BBC. And now it's time to go to France. And more fun and games with Harry Atterton. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Keith. How are you?
I'm well this morning, and you?
I know I'm in terrible shape. I'm under the weather. I'm not sure what it is, but for the past 4 or 5 days, I've been suffering from the dreaded lurgy, as we used to say when we were kids. And we don't know quite what it is, just probably a seasonal cold. But I hope I can, express myself reasonably intelligently or audibly in the next little while.
I can hear the cold in your voice, and
Yes.
any time that you think that this is tiring you out, feel free to return into the folds of that wonderful castle that you live in.
Well, I would love to have my demise on public television. I mean, what could be a greater honor? I mean, but anyway, there you go.
Harry, I have to say that as I've struggled hard and long this last year to try and put together a really good team, so that we've got a good television station. And I sent you a note along with the others who were involved, because when we come back from our Christmas break on the 8th of January, we really have got a team that is worthy of the BBC. And I can tell you that in some of the local apps, particularly, but even things like LinkedIn and so on, is since you and one or two others have joined, the numbers have been steadily climbing. So please, can you last out for another couple of years?
Oh, I'm sure I can. I've got 3 years to go. I planned, but when I reach 90 in 3 years' time, I shall go into politics.
Well, I must say you couldn't do any worse than the present lot.
Absolutely. But when you made a comparison with this between us and the BBC, I mean, are you not sure you were damning us with faint praise? Or?
Well, strangely enough, I hadn't realised just sometimes how my disdain for some of the things, now I say some of the things that the BBC do, shows through. But the two boys this morning, the two barristers, who of course are trained to winkle things out, soon had me going. And I really think that there are some things that we do better than the BBC, and long may that continue.
Well, I think the BBC at the moment is, of course, being accused of lack of impartiality, and there's a certain argument that says that's true. But inevitably, any human endeavor is a reflection of the people involved, and there's no question that people in one particular television company or another could have their political biases, and it would be quite an amazing thing if these preferences or these biases, as I say, did not show through. And so, to the average viewer like myself, when I see the BBC, I certainly see a left-wing bias, generally speaking. And by left-wing, it doesn't mean Labour Conservative. It means the new positioning, I think, of what used to be the old political left, which is now based more on things like woke. It's almost become a religion instead of a politics. So, yes, you can see television stations and individual representatives developing particular alignments with points of view which may not be those held by their own viewers. One of the problems, I think, with British politics, if not American and French politics for that matter, is that the parties in power, elected by the people, are not carrying out the wishes of the people. And so there's an enormous void developing between, let's say, the so-called conservative government and the conservative philosophy in Britain, and that gap is going to be filled by somebody, quite evidently. And nature abhors a vacuum, and politics the same. So somebody will replace the Conservative Party, Parliamentary Conservative Party, and we're going through a massive change. Now, these are exciting times, and maybe major change is what's required. We're seeing how that happens in countries like Argentina with the Milei, this rather wild character who's taken over as president. But he's coming in with ideas, and maybe it's radical reform that's needed. So these are all things that we have the pleasure of the privilege of observing from the sidelines. But it's a predictable dynamic. These things happen because things have slipped too far the other way, and that the traditional party lines have become blurred, I think we, the sheep, were just led whichever way, and hopefully not to the slaughter, just to be shorn again. But we shall see.
I do worry that broad condemnation comes from the community for people who are different. This morning, Starmer, the leader of the opposition, is being blamed by those left-wing people that you just mentioned as for praising Margaret Thatcher as being a factor of change. And indeed she was, whether you approved of it or didn't, a factor of change. And strangely enough, is, now in polite society, if you mention Farage, Nigel Farage, is people look at you as if you've got some sort of disease, and yet to me the only thing that Farage is he's different.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know that he said anything terribly outrageous. He hasn't done any sort of Hitlerite type suggestions or Mao type suggestions, or the sort of things that people would normally throw their hats into the air and say, "Oh my God!" And I really have never on this television station. The only thing is I've said to you, and I say to everybody else, and don't break copyright. Otherwise, say what you like and take what opinion you want. That way, we've got a balanced station.
I think that's a good idea, and I mean, you give an example of Farage. I think it's typical because, again, he began through Brexit, but through other factors, to fill a space, a vacuum that existed in British politics, and therefore it became a menace to the mainstream and needed to be marginalized. And one of the best ways to do that is to make fun of them, the way they've made fun of Trump in the States. Now, Trump is a particularly easy person to make fun of, but that's the first thing to do to destroy a person's credibility, is to make them look ridiculous. But Farage has weathered all of the storms. And when he goes into some of these battles, either they're well chosen or he's an amazing Napoleonic strategist, because he comes out the winner. And if he throws his hat in the ring, he's a symbolic chief of reform at the moment, is the chairman. Tice is kind of running the show. But if he does choose to throw his hat in the ring one last time, I think that won't do any good. They're just trying to make fun of him because
No.
this guy is turning out to be a serial winner. It's whether he wants a quiet life and drink his pint. I'm not a particular big fan of Farage, but I can see him filling a space that the main parties have left.
Yes, I can too.
Mhm,
I shouldn't say I met him. I was introduced to him a couple of times
mhm,
by a friend of mine in the city. I always saw him as a sort of a pipe smoking slipper type guy who was sort of poised to dash into whatever happened to come in front of him. I quite like the guy actually.
mhm. Well, obviously, he's pretty bright and he has leadership qualities. I'm not sure what his policies are. I mean, if I were asked to explain what he would plan to do if he came to power, I couldn't tell you. And that's partly my fault for not having paid more attention to what his proposals are. But it does appear at this stage, as most politicians do, mind you, speak in platitudes and how wonderful it's going to be when the sun comes up on Monday morning next week. But how is he going to hold it up? The sun's a pretty heavy load, and you need a lot of chains and pulling power to change his position. So, what his program would be, I'm not at all sure. Uh, but instead of thinking of Farage, let's think of change. We need dramatic change. And going back to Margaret Thatcher, she represented that. Tony Blair with New Labour represented change. Um, Wonderful term, New Labour. I think it was. I think the word is conservatism. Actually, it became a true conservative for a while. And that left a gap, and so the Conservative Party became socialists, from what I can see. So, I mean, if the music stops, change chairs. You know, I mean, it's
Good
just so
morning.
silly, so silly. So, and anyway, but politics is an interesting subject, and you mention the fact that we should feel free to talk about that, not to inflict our silly ideas on anybody else, but simply to expose thought and stimulate. Simulate other people's thinking. And what is happening? There is a more open debate, I think, at the moment than has previously the case. When we were young, if you went to a dinner party, you were told before you sat down, you shouldn't talk about sex, politics, religion, or war. Well, it didn't leave a hell of a lot left to talk about. Um, whereas now, mind you, there are certain inhibitions. You're no longer allowed to talk about global warming. You're no longer the biggest issue that's facing the planet,
Oh, I know.
and you're not allowed to talk about it. You, if
And
you
language.
language,
I mean, one of our late colleagues went to a dinner party where the two parents were really distressed because their children had come home and accused them of using the word feisty.
I missed that. Which word? Feist?
Feisty.
Oh, that's feisty. Yes, right.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes. The millennials see that as some sort of hidden meaning.
that's amazing. Well, there you go. I mean, language, but
Yes.
language is. I mean, let's not talk about language because I'm so saddened by the decline in the use of language. They say that the average person in Britain calls upon a daily vocabulary of some 2,000 words. There are 280,000 words in the English language.
Language.
Okay, a lot
Yes.
of them technical, I must admit. And that even a very learned person, a professor of English literature at Cambridge, might call upon a vocabulary of 20,000 words. The
Yes.
ability to exploit the language that we have is
Yes.
diminishing to an amazing degree, and we
Can I
won't
just
get to.
break in for a moment, Harry? Behind us is our chief of staff.
Oh,
That's Declan. who is our host and allows us to come in here. But not only that, he looks after us and he sort of administers things, and he's really a first-class chap. And not only that, but he's a great publican, and I know that you'll approve of that.
Okay, that's Declan, isn't it?
Declan, indeed.
Declan, yes, I did meet him the other day. Good, solid type.
Absolutely, yeah. He provided me with a marvelous Sunday lunch yesterday.
Hi, Declan.
Morning, Declan.
Good.
We had Ada in earlier, who is the his sub chief of staff, and she dusts me around the corners at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'll tell you.
What impresses me about Declan is that I'm sure he induces good behaviour in his pub, because if anybody didn't do it, they'd soon find their way on the other side of the door.
Yeah, there's no trouble in this pub at all.
Good show. But anyway, no. Back to the two questions there we got opened up on. One, the question of language, and language is being policed enormously at the moment. There are so many words that you're not allowed to say because they may have some ancient connotation, words to do with again racial implication, of sexual implication. Anything that seeks to differentiate between the so-called sexes has now become non-allowed. So no, there is a language police operating at the moment, and yes. Freedom, the margins of freedom are reducing considerably. I feel, language-wise, you've got to be careful what you say, and never mind the ideas. Language is a means of expressing ideas. It's simply a vehicle for communication.
Yes, and to be quite honest with you, those people that really object to words, I think, are showing their own bias, not the bias of the user. I mean, I'm going to really stick my neck out here, but this morning we had the two barristers on, and we got on to Guy Gibson and the Dam Busters. And of course, his dog was had the name that we're not supposed to mention. And they tried to wipe it out of the movie and found that they couldn't. And thank God they couldn't, because it was not meant in that sense at all.
Right. No, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, and what about the myriads of words in another language, which in our language are vulgar words?
Yes.
They're standard words in other languages. Very common names are in some of the Asian languages are expletives in the English language. Are we to change that? I mean, it's all getting very silly.
Yes. Well, one of the silly things is that most of the algorithms and that sort of thing on social media, of course, are devised in the United States. And they hate the word bloody. Now, the title of our documentary is The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town. And I put that into one of these social media things, saying, do cash it. It's a worthwhile documentary. And it came up and said, "Are you sure that you want to use this title, because it may be rubbed out or erased from social platforms?" How bloody ridiculous!
No, don't ask Mary about that. Bloody Mary.
Oh, you're on form this morning. You may have a cold, but you're on form.
Yes. No, it's all getting very silly. But perhaps the silliest thing that's happening at the moment, ready for it, is this incredible boondoggle in Abu Dhabi, the COP28. What do you make of that?
Oh, heavens! Well, first of all, I mean, I'm reasonably aware of what's going on around me, but that COP 28 or 58 or 68 or whatever it is that crept up on me. I didn't realise that so many important people were going, and apparently there was something like 120 delegates or something to this one conference. Just absolutely incredible. But it is. I mean, yes, they are all being polite and yet falling out.
Well, the carbon footprint of holding the conference is so huge. It's probably the largest single event of the year in that context. I've heard figures that go as high as 400,000, which I don't quite believe, attending. I think probably the truth is probably about 100 and something,
Yeah.
150,000 maybe.
Yes,
But can you
but
imagine?
I think it's like they only count, don't they? It's like the G8 or G7 now. Of course, we
Mhm,
kicked Russia out. G7. I've covered a G7 conference, and you can't move for bodies.
mhm.
There are only 7 people represented there, but there are thousands. You're quite right, thousands of it's just milling all over the place.
Mhm. Well, we to understand this a little bit from an English point of view, I think we need to go back to when the Climate Act was voted. Forget which year now, but even at the time, the cost benefit assessment of the Climate Act was that it would cost twice as much as the money it would save. And that was then, and now the figures are going through the roof. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
and the cost of seeking to artificially reach point zero and emission zero in 2050 is becoming absolutely ridiculous. It would put the world drive the world back into middle ages
yes,
poverty. But still, there's no open debate about that. If you talk about it, you become a climate denier. Nobody, I think, with a reasonable knowledge of the history of climate change, which has changed up and down throughout history, throughout the existence of the planet, is going to deny climate change. Um, we're in a phase at the moment of global warming. Some say we're actually on the edge of a new ice age. But it would appear to be largely cyclical. So the question becomes: is what is the contribution made by man? Well, you need to be able to measure the natural change and then subtract or add the difference to know what man's contribution is. And nobody is able to do that. They simply add figures, given ridiculous figures, which 10 years later are proved to be so hopelessly out of line that the credibility of the argument is being shattered. And when it starts to impact upon people's lives, and not just those of us in the Western world who maybe would reduce our quality of life a little bit by switching what from gas fires to so-called renewable energies, but about those countries in the world, three-quarters of the world, where people have been brought out of poverty, are brought out of starvation. Do they want to be put back into that awful world that they were in before? I don't think we're going to bring them along with us, and they will continue to develop systems to improve the quality of their life, which will have tremendous negative results on man's contribution to global warming. So it's just becoming also
yes.
very also
Is
disgusting.
what I over a period of a lifetime, Harry, and I mean, my life is just a little bit shorter than yours, but not much. Is it seems to me that what starts out as a nub of something that is rather good it then is picked up by those people who fabricate all sorts of different things around it. I mean, for instance, I can remember when you and I were together in Vancouver, which would be about 1960 some odd.
Mm.
Is I can remember that I can uh, uh, do reading a story about fish had been reintroduced to the lower reaches of the Thames.
Oh yes.
The water being so polluted, and that Buckingham Palace had been cleaned of grime.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those were wonderful things. Oh, my goodness me. Look at how marvelous all this is. And now, 50 years on or 60 years on, it's all just a mishmash and we don't know where it's heading.
Well, first of all, I mean, let's not get mixed up between climate change and pollution and environmental protection. Obviously, we want.
I think that there's a lot of intertwining between them, though.
Sure, we need to clean up the planet. We need to do a lot of things. We the terrible smogs that is to hit London, hopefully, are now very much a thing of the past. So many of these environmental moves are very sensible, very wise, and they're to do with health and quality of life. So one mustn't throw out the baby with the bathwater on these things. Right. But if we stick just to this theory of climate change and man trying to fight natural climate change by blaming it all on himself, then we get into a difficult area, and I think we're heading down a dangerous path, which will lead to world poverty, a new wave of world poverty or domination by those countries that say they're doing something about it, but are not really doing anything about it. And so we'll have weakened ourselves economically to the benefit of these other countries, which is why there's a very strong belief that many of the environmental associations, the ones involved in climate change, I'm not talking about fish in the Thames, are being financed by foreign money. Because it's the whole thing is a political endeavor. So that's the problem we've got to face and face up to. But when you have in the world another figure, I mean, I can't support this figure, and so it's wrong of me to repeat it. But the number of scientists, I believe, runs into the hundreds of thousands of worldwide who make their living out of climate change.
Yeah.
Now, and they're scientists, and we're just simple lads that grew up around the block, and what do we know about it? That is the scientific proof is, so we just must fall down on bended knee and listen to that. But they make their money from this. It's enormous. The actual economic interest that, and then the companies that make whirligigs, what do you call them, wind turbines and stuff like that. Yeah. And they happen to be mostly Chinese, I believe, and solar panels, again Chinese. The bits and pieces you need for electric cars, again Chinese. Does it sound like I'm anti-China? No. Why should I be anti-China? I mean, they're struggling to get ahead just the same as anybody else is anywhere. But we just shouldn't be taken in by all of this nonsense. It's to we who produce such a very small part of global warming, man-made global warming. But then again, we still don't know what we do produce, because how much of it is natural and how much is it because of human activity?
Yes, exactly.
Until somebody can tell me that and say, okay, we can remove the human factor if we spend so much, and that is going to save us so much. But those figures are not available. And there are very few, I would imagine, government-sponsored studies that are being carried out to counterbalance the enormous amount of work that has been done and money being made, sponsorships being given by the manufacturer of solar panels to come up with the right figures to justify their product. We're being led down the garden path, I think.
Yes.
Or maybe not. Or maybe not.
Well, maybe not. But where there is money involved, I've found, whether it's professional football or global warming, is finding reform and change. The incumbents are very, very loath to make any changes at all.
It distorts it. Money distorts everything. Money can be a positive factor. Money makes the world go round. I mean, it would be fun if there wasn't any. We need to. We need in a capitalist system, in an exchange system, we need some means of paying for what we consume. So no, I mean, but when it becomes too concentrated in its application, when somebody becomes or governments pursue um, uh, political goals through cornering the market on precious metals of some sort, or metals essential to the making of, at the moment, batteries, then you realize that there's a distortion in the marketplace, which is being generated by the application of money, of wealth.
Yes.
Anyway, the way it goes.
Yeah.
Are
Sorry,
you
Harry.
having?
I keep my phone on simply because I like to make sure we stay on top of the news. So,
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't realise that number. So,
Oh no, I thought I heard something banging there. No.
that is the chief of staff who
Yeah.
actually gets his fingers dirty and actually makes the fire himself when he
Oh
comes in.
my goodness. Yes. Yes.
I mean, I'm not sure that the chief of staff shouldn't be telling somebody else to do
Yes. Yes. Well,
it.
and it's probably that's to do with modern work rules or something.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Now, let's switch for a moment, Harry, because one of the headlines this morning is the question of the license fee, which supports the BBC.
Yes.
How is the state broadcaster in France funded?
Well, there isn't a state broadcaster as such, but we do have a peculiar system in France where um, most of the major news outlets, certainly the newspapers, are actually given subsidies as long as they toe the government line. I mean, can you imagine anything, a free press? I mean, it's got to be a joke. I mean, huge news organizations, newspapers that change hands for literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, get subsidies from the government. Those who don't toe the official line do not get
Yeah.
any subsidies. Um,
Now you've actually enlightened me there because I'm glad I asked the question. I had no idea that that's how media was paid for or subsidized in
mhm.
France.
That's a lot of the print media is subsidized. Now, if you get into the television channels, there there are two ways of doing that. It's through the shareholder system, and who is the major shareholders, and you do get a lot of government involvement there in some channels, but above all, you get the authority, the television authority is the best way that I can put it. They the people who call the shots, and they decide the rules and what can and cannot be broadcast. So that there's a very close link
Yes.
between people politically appointed to head these control organizations and the content that the different television channels can put out. And if they accidentally, let's say, or inadvertently drift a little bit too far to the right, since France is a left-wing country, absolutely a left-wing country without any way, shape, or form. I think I've mentioned before there are 28 schools of journalism in France attached to various universities, and 27 of them you cannot graduate unless you are left-wing. And many of leading middle of the road, right wing, sometimes French journalists will admit to the fact that that they wrote their papers and wrote their exam papers from a left-wing point of view, simply to graduate before they could become practicing in the field that they wanted to. I mean, it is an absolute scandal. But then again, France, left-wing countries, still scarred by its revolution, and that's the way it is. So, if, for instance, one of these so-called fringe newspapers veers a little bit to the right, they're hauled before the commission, and they're heavily fined, and
Yes.
and even they could lose their license to practice. French television licenses are issued every year. So you'd better watch if you own a television company and you invested billions, tens of billions of dollars in it commercially, you don't want to have your license revoked, do you?
No, no.
And then,
Just as a little aside to that, Harry, I have a friend. I don't see her very often, but we stay in touch on social media. Whose father is a publisher of an independent newspaper in Moscow. And she the last time we spoke, she asked, "Is there any way that you could help Keith by putting on pressure?" Because her father, they didn't ban his newspaper, but he came to the office one day and found all the furniture out in the street because it was, and they decided to take it back without any due notice, just simply padlock the door. So that's the way that some countries deal with their dissident press.
well, indeed it is, and some some countries are even more subtle. They allow one or two dissident press outlets to show how fair and open they're being. Um, but no, the subsidization of the French press is a well-known scandal. Even journalists get special tax regimes. Now,
Wow.
yes, I mean, so you're allowed to write off more expenses and end up with more of your take-home pay as long as you play the game. So the idea of an independent press in France, it exists, but these people don't get any help. They've got to try and make it on their own. Whereas the mainstream press is subsidized and subverted in France. No question about it.
Yes. That is interesting. Why I'm not aware of that, I have no idea. I think probably is that I've never worked in France, not as a journalist anyway. Um, is almost every other country in the world, but not in France.
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to be aware of the rules and regulations governing where you've been subjected to them.
Well, this is it. We have the scandal at the moment. Well, scandal. It's not a scandal in my opinion, but the question of this woman Meghan Markle accusing the royal family of racism because somebody, it turns out to have perhaps been His Majesty the King and Princess of Wales, speculating on the possible skin color
Yes.
of their first born. Well, that's the most natural thing in the world.
In the world, isn't it? Yes.
If you get in a mixed race marriage, it's almost it would be unbelievable.
Just it's just an ordinary topic of conversation.
A
Yeah.
topic of conversation, but they're making a big
Yeah.
issue of that. Now, similarly, in France, there is a group of Arab children. Well, no, French children of Arab extraction, probably born French. Whether the gate crashed a village party and started knifing the people and killed one young man, a lovely young man, and and with cries of, we're going to fix you, whitey, and all that sort of, typical racial crying and things like this were heard and reported by the people present. But the government refused the press the right to give the names of the attackers because they were all Arabic names, and they didn't want to create some sort of an ethnic tension. They wanted to try and calm the game down and not set one side against the other. But that's the control that the government has on the press in France.
Oh, heavens.
And the
Yes.
French themselves are getting very unhappy about that. But
Yes. Yes.
the names,
Well, I would find that very offensive, I must
names have
confess.
finally come out. But none of had they had European sounding names, their names would have been on the front page of the paper the next day.
Yeah.
But because they had Arabic names, and they were French, they were probably born in France, these kids, not very old, 12, 14, 18, I have no idea. But because they were Arabic names, the government ruled that their names could not be published. So let's not talk about a free press in France.
No, no.
Mm-hmm.
That is disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that they don't try to start monitoring Mirador and hear some of your views then.
Well, my views are, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I come across. I've got some very strong. I come from a very staunch left-wing family.
If I may say so, Harry, I enjoy having these discussions with you because you actually come across as the voice of reason. Is your views are well thought out, and I believe that part of the role of television is to stop giving the extremes, but to have voices of reason, but who can talk about the unspeakable that the extremists won't allow on the air.
Absolutely, and I don't know quite how I come across to you, but I come from a staunch left-wing family and retain a lot of views. My grandfather was head of the miners' union. I retain quite a number of mind you, through my own life, espoused quite a number of conservative views, or yet at the same time, I'm appalled by the present conservative government in Britain. Like so many fellow conservatives, I couldn't vote for these guys. The sooner we get them out of there, the better. The mess that's going to come in afterwards is predictable, but at least it will allow for a clean out and something new, a new phoenix, a political phoenix, will hopefully rise from the ashes. So my view goes from left to right.
It highlights the attempts by the establishment to pigeonhole people. And while I can see to some extent that if I wear a tie and I wear this hat and I put a pipe between my teeth, people will look at me and say, "Oh yes, he's this sort of chap." But pigeonholing people by using their thoughts is just something that is the establishment very much attempting to make us do. That's Liza Page, by the way, who comes on after you, who has just arrived. Liza does the alternative view, and is very much a fan of David Icke, whose name you will remember.
Okay, very good, very good. But no, I think we're in for a period of change, and I think that's a good thing. And I suspect the change is going to happen very, very quickly.
I think so too. I agree with you on that. The thing is, Harry, that sometimes I think it was one of the rugby heroes who termed the RFU the old farts. And sometimes people look at us as the old farts. But one thing about old farts is that we actually express views based on a lifetime of experience. And one of the nice things about you is that you're, in fact, probably better traveled than I am. And we're able to make a considered view of various things because we've experienced either the opposite or where things are denied or supported or whatever. In other words, our views are moderated by our own experience, whereas those people whose views are moderated by somebody else's experience, which is a bit frightening.
Well, most of our views, even ours, as old farts, we're still been influenced by people along the way. And it's not to say that we're right, because attitudes need to change, thought needs to be flexible, and there's no guarantee that we're right. And I think that's one of the things that we do learn as we get older, that we may be wrong. And whereas the young person is absolutely imbued with a sense of self-worth, and that his ideas or her ideas are the only ones on the block that are worth considering. And I think, was it George Bernard Shaw who said the problem with youth, it's wasted on the young?
Well, I think also that one of those things that helps shape our views is, particularly when we're younger, by being very bold and making statements only to be slapped down and not being able to defend our position. And as we grow older, we realise that if we're going to make outrageous statements, is that we've got to at least be able to defend them or justify them to some extent. We can't just go around making statements.
Indeed.
If I could just give you the sort of thing that prevails in various parts of the world. In Kosovo, I was responsible for rather a large budget, actually, I mean, $6 million worth of developing the media. And journalists were feeling their oats, being able to, at long last, express their views. And they went after the CEO, a lady of the local telecoms company. And I was responsible for trying to keep them in order. And their arguments went something like this: she is corrupt. Why is she corrupt? She makes a profit. You know, that's a bit of old thinking. But what evidence have you got? Well, everybody knows. What do you mean? Everybody knows. They had no justification whatsoever, so they were perhaps easy pickings. But you do come across in your lifetime that sort of thinking from supposedly intelligent people and in supposedly sophisticated societies.
Indeed, and to many people, the end justifies the means. And if they've got a political bone between their teeth, they don't care about the truth. Their goal is to get to where they want to be by whatever means they need to use. And some people call that revolution. And when people become overly resistant to change and fair change, it does lead to extreme forms of application, as we see in the major revolutions in the world. So we have to be open-minded. We have to keep our thoughts open, and that's why we need public debate. And that's what's missing at the moment. We can't discuss the issues that are truly important. The second you do, opinion polarizes, and it's a them or us situation.
Yes.
So that's the philosophy, which I think is rather sad, but that's going to change, and it's going to change dramatically very soon, because it's been drifting on now for so long.
Yes.
That radical
Well,
change.
let's hope that we can be a very, very modest and minor force for that change, Harry.
Yeah.
We've been at it for 48 minutes now, and Liza is champing at the bit, ready to take over from you in a minute or two's time. Now we have an exciting project that we've got to talk about.
Yes.
As you will see from a little note that I sent you the other day, giving you a progress report, is we are going to stop broadcasting on the 18th and not to start again until the 8th. And I think we will take that hiatus to discuss in detail some of the projects that we've got, because everybody's getting quite excited about the form that we've suggested in terms of medieval pageants. So we will do that. And in the meantime, that still gives us next week. So I shall look forward to seeing you this time next week.
Well,
We'll have another.
I hope I'm in better form next week because
Well, you've been in very great form this morning, my boy. Perhaps a little touch of cold is the thing that it really boosts you.
well, I shall probably return to the marital couch early today to continue to get well again. But anyway, great to talk to you and to all of the good people who put up with this our nonsense. So look forward to being with you next week.
Indeed, and I mean, it's very acceptable nonsense, Harry.
Okay, well, it goes back a long way.
Indeed.
It's good vintage.
We'll see you
Good
next
vintage.
week. But as you know, with our type of television, it's quite possible that we'll be in touch with you in the meantime. You never know.
Okay, talk to you
Okay,
soon then.
right. Bye,
Goodbye.
Harry.
Bye.
Right, Harry Atterton, and we'll say Toodle Pip for 5 minutes while Liza prepares to bring her program to you, alternative views. So let's just say there she is, getting ready. So we'll say Toodle Pip for the moment, and we'll be back very shortly. Toodle Pip.